So I would like to open the floor to questions, if anyone has any straight off the bat. There we go, there's a hand straight up at the back.
Hi, yeah, I had a question about the free parking system you set up, which sounds amazing. We've been thinking about it, but too scared to try it. A couple of questions. How do you enforce that? Is there a person manning the gates? Is there an electronic barrier? Is there just a lot of signs?
Yeah.
And my other one was, would you say it takes more or less staff time than the old management system?
Okay, so in answer to the second question, less during the day but more during the night because Pen and Pass is a 24-hour car park, so we have to hire overnight security to cover that, but the additional car parking fees have helped fund that as well as the buses. And I guess in terms of, what was the first question, sorry?
How are you enforcing the pre-book parking, stopping people just going in? Is there a ticket barrier or a man on the gate, or is it security? Or
Yeah. So we've got staff on site all the time. We used to have to have up to 3 staff on site at a time just to manage the bedlam that was Pen and Pass. But we now just have 1 member of staff at a time. And we are looking at a barrier. It's just trying to find a system that works well, that also works with that barrier. And there are some additional kind of technical challenges with public rights of way and that sort of thing. So we'll be looking at a barrier in the future, but at the minute, there seems to be a boat passing.
You're talking about ghosts?
Yeah. But at the minute it's just having, we've always had staff on site and we've got slightly less staff on site. And the system we use is Just Park,
yeah,
but there are other systems out there.
Sorry, was there something else?
No, do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, hi, thanks. It's a bit of perhaps a comment really, and a bit of thought that I haven't really answered in my own question in a sense, but it's all about sustainability, this conference, and looking at the Snowdon example, it's how we manage our very important assets. We have a wood on Dartmoor called Wismar's Wood, which is an ancient woodland with trees, ferns, epiphytes and mosses. It's become very popular for all sorts of reasons, whether people want to scrape the moss off the stones and make gorgeous sort of Celtic designs or whatever, take sticks away to make wands, wizard wands, it's all quite bizarre some of it, but in many ways it's people really wanting to connect with some very ancient, special places. And particularly in a post-COVID world, that connection with nature is massively important, and I know that myself, and I think what Julian was saying, it's one of the big issues to be trying to tackle. We ended up having to put some double yellow lines literally a few weeks ago all around an area called Two Bridges, where you get access to Wismar's Wood. And yeah, I totally accept there's a quite specific question there about how did you do the car parking thing. But I think in a sense there's sort of a bit of a broader, bigger question about how do we really protect those very special gems that people particularly want to go to, because many of our places we've got left are almost little islands, aren't they, in a bigger landscape. They're sort of very special little areas that are disconnected really. And I guess somehow at the end of this conference, I want to try and somehow get that question answered in a way. And it's a big one, I think you mentioned at the beginning as well, it's that protecting, it's that nature connectedness. So it's not a question actually thinking about it, it's a bit of a, for me in my brain, I'm trying to work out how we manage that real connection.
I was just going to say, and this may be oversimplistic, I'm not frontline in your space, but something I have done in the past in frontline activity where I've had a particular area that we absolutely, the garden team did not want that area gone to, they did not want that area touched, there was very strong reason for that with the RHS trials. So we created a space very near to that people could go to, that had more the Instagrammable approach. The technology today, everybody, young people, they're always on. They always want to be using social channels and they want that Instagrammable photo. So it's kind of thinking how you create that in a different way with an area that is adjacent to or close by, or you say, not here, but here, is how I would look at it.
And to add to that, I mean, I know Wistman's would work well and have visited it for many years and seen its degradation over the past few years as well. I think what Janet's saying is right, but I think what we need to do is, people who are managing protected landscapes need to think hard about, for something like Wistman's Wood, there's a very small defined area fenced off. Maybe we need to be expanding that area. Maybe we need to be growing it, planting more sessile oak around, and actually creating a bigger space, a buffer space. Because that was a wooded landscape, and it's just because of sheep grazing that it's actually come down, and it's basically that very small little area which is trying to survive, and it's too small. So you've got to think, a lot of things with kind of nature and biodiversity and protection is about connecting corridors or making things larger so they're of a scale that they can survive. And I think that's what we should do with Wistman's Wood. Make it bigger, make it better.
Thank you. That's really
I think it comes also back to one of the points that you made, Julian, about trails. And it's about shifting the mindset to, if you look at the visitor numbers, how many visitors are actually visiting that area? And it could be on the scale of like a big kind of well-managed visitor attraction. And although it's challenging, you have to kind of shift your mindset to, we're managing a visitor attraction, but we're going to do it in a way that it's in the most kind of natural, non-intrusive way possible. And as soon as you make that shift, it becomes a lot easier to kind of make those interventions. It feels uncomfortable for some people, but it is the reality. Is that goes back to crowd psychology. You're managing a huge amount of people, so the approach you need to take needs to be different.
There's some really interesting points there. Yeah, thank you. I think there's an interesting point about that kind of relationship between connection to nature and the impact of connecting people to nature. But I think what you were just saying there about trails, we have a very specific history of rights of way network. Our rights of way legislation is designed to sort of put people in certain areas, and there might be some fundamental questions really about the way that people are guided into those sites now because of the legislation that underpins them. Possibly for another time, but I'll open the floor. So we've got Pippa and Jonathan. We've got lots of questions. Sorry, Pippa first, and then Jonathan.
Yeah, this was really following up on what Janet said about dispersal, and you just touched on that social media thing. Could you say a bit more about how to do dispersal when you've got social media feeds pushing the 5 best waterfalls in the Lake District appeared in my feed yesterday, thinking, oh my God, those 5 waterfalls are going to be rammed in the next week or so. How do you kind of respond to that, or how do you proactively get ahead of it?
I think it's challenging in that, there are certain areas that we wish were not covered on the news. When the sun's shining and suddenly a weather reporter goes to a certain area and that area is going to get completely deluged. Yep, I understand what you're saying. I think the responsibility maybe is to use those social channels proactively, almost instantly, by responding to those posts with ideas of other places and identifying at pace where else safely those people could be directed to go to. It isn't easy. There's not an easy solution, but I think it's using the same channel to get the message out to a space where you could divert. That is the best I could give you.
Make sure you've got a good Instagram channel, and that you're pushing out your own messages rather than having to respond to others.
And tag us all with that, isn't it, really? Because, we will amplify and others will amplify, tag those key partners in that area.
Jonathan.
Thank you, Joe. That speaker's really good start to the conference. The thing I got thinking about, I do apologise because I asked 2 questions. I can't remember what the first question was. I think it was towards Julian. But car parking. Okay. Down in Hampshire, where I'm from, we have both the South Downs and the New Forest area. I know Richard's in the audience here, so I'm probably going to call him as part of this question. We have a lot of car parks in the New Forest. A lot of them. 180 odd. I hope that's right. So we are looking at how we manage our visitors. We have an awful lot of verge parking. We have an awful lot of probably quite negative visitor experience when people head to a destination, can't park there, then where do they go? Where's the next nearest car park? What's the next quality place they can go to? One of the things we've been talking around was around car park spaces and whether or not there is an effective mechanism saying a Twitter account that sort of says Penny Pass full. I suggest you go to this site or this site, and those sites that you suggest may well be those sites which are more, can cope with that level of visitor better. 65 parking spaces is nothing for the sort of interest that area has. But that sort of, if you want to come to this area, register on this app, and we'll tell you which areas are busy, which areas you can park in, and which areas you can't. And that would be really useful for us down in the New Forest particularly, because the level of verge parking that we get and the damage on the common that incurs. But equally, we're trying to encourage people away from those really vulnerable areas of the New Forest and encourage them to areas which are a lot less vulnerable. They may not be as pretty, but those areas that can sustain those visitors.
So there's an element of, and I think this has been the challenge on Snowdon is, people want to go to those sites that they want to go to, and that's the only place they're going to go, because it's the highest mountain, or it's on their top 10 list. So in that sense, it's about kind of accepting the fact that there is a certain amount of people that are going to visit and what you can put in place, and it goes back to the carrot and stick thing. So, the verge parking is potentially a double yellow line, and just being really clear with people about what the other options are. We are trialling, and they're installed, and it's going to be kind of launched this year, sensors within the car parks, and Angela has just arrived at the back, blue t-shirt, hello. So Angela this afternoon is going to be taking you on a site visit, and she'll talk a bit more about this. But essentially, you'll be able to look at an app and see which car parks are full and where there are spaces available. So, we're happy to share kind of how that goes. I think there's an element that it could work really well, but there's also an element of, going back to your point about making sure that information is out there and that it's easy for people to find, because we know that a lot of visitors don't do that much research, or they might just kind of Google Snowdon and then head there. So it's making sure that they get that information really easily before they actually get to the car park, and you've got a problem then, haven't you?
Just and a longer term, I think we need to take a longer term view on this as well, in terms of equity of access and who has access to cars in the future. And if we're trying to reach audiences who can't necessarily afford to have cars, then really think about prioritising those other forms of transport. And I was involved 20 years ago in the South Downs closing car parks, and and had to manage the comms during that, and that was hard. But it meant that those people who needed to be able to get there from the local community were able to get there and access. So, and also helps improve public transport if you're then making that people have to use the public transport to get to sites.
Gentleman in the black t-shirt first.
Morning, Sam Jones, I'm with Forestry England. If I can be cheeky, two very quick ones. First one's a technical one, maybe, Helen, with your graph and the visitor numbers. I'm pretty sure you said this is a threshold point, and I was just quite interested. I know it's probably a lot of detail that we maybe do offline, but separately. But how are you determining threshold? What are the factors there that you bring in?
I'm going to try to not use swear words in the response.
Again.
Getting a reputation. It's basically when you really see an acceleration in those challenges. So it's not actually that technical. It's kind of, where do you start to see you're starting to get real issues with litter, with parking, and that's about having that continuous conversation with the on-site teams as well, to kind of really get a proper feel about how the season is kind of developing as well. So in Snowdonia we have a WhatsApp team for the on-the-ground rangers, car park team, volunteers.
More like an agile sort of monitoring.
Yeah, and we meet every week just for half an hour virtually to go kind of where are the issues. So at the end of the season then we have a bit of a review to see what the issues have been and kind of compare that to last season. So, isn't that technical, and there are technical ways of doing it, but from everything I've seen, that takes a huge amount of resource to be able to do that.
A lot of time you've got the plan, the ship sail.
Yeah, and the question is, can you just go, oh, actually, we can see these issues accelerating rapidly?
Thank you. Second one was more around strategy for change and stakeholders, and I think it's probably applicable to everyone. It was triggered by Julian, your discussion, and the sort of principles that you were building the strategy and the approach around. And critically, it's around in South, like crossover Jonathan Richard, as we mentioned, that a number of our protected landscapes, we are asking some of the bigger questions in Forestry England around how we take it forward sustainably. Some of that will bring a lot of change for a lot of people, different agencies and things. Our hope, our plan where possible, and I get the point, you've got to be brave sometimes and go, but is to do things with them, not to them, and how we're engaging and understanding. And I'm sure everyone's similar. We don't lack forums in southern England, but I would probably say most of those are similar voices and agencies, and one of the things we're talking about is the silent majority. The smaller voices that actually probably represent a huge number of people, and some of these changes are probably going to impact them more. So getting to the point, have you got any thoughts or experiences where you've extended those consultations beyond those traditional groups that we talk to a lot, and bring in those community representatives? Yep. Maybe they're economic, maybe they're different bases, and if there's any thoughts or principles with ideas.
Couple of thoughts. One of them is you've got to make sure you've got support from the top. So get your governance model right first. So when we transitioned from being a long distance walking club to a health and wellbeing charity, we went out and actively recruited 3 or 4 new trustees who came with very specific health and wellbeing experience in mental health, in social inclusion, in physical health, and in health communications. And by doing that right from the top, we were then able to build that into our strategy, so we had the support and we knew that we would be able to go out and trial. Secondly, we have a fund which is an innovation fund, and the purpose of that fund is to try and fail. Yeah? And just trying to fail is quite an interesting proposition, but we do because we learn from those failures. And everyone has got an opportunity, everyone in the team has got an opportunity to access that innovation fund. And then thirdly, reaching different audiences. So I started off my career as a ranger, boots on the ground, but I was in South East London, and I was involved in the Thames Chase Community Forest, engaging first generation immigrants in connecting to nature and all those things. And it really is about face-to-face communication, understanding where people are coming from, what their issues are, and when you engage with them, you can then have a conversation, and it's a two-way conversation. It's not us telling people this is what you've got to do, it's us finding out what you want to do. Brilliant, if you want to do that, then why not do it in this way over here? It's brilliant, So it's developing those kind of engagements, and there's lots of tools out there these days, both face-to-face but also using online tools to be able to engage with people who we don't normally engage with, and we've got to be better at it as an industry.
Mark, you had a question? Oh, sorry.
So I was just going to follow up on that and just go back to one of the slides that I showed with Plas y Brenin at the centre of all the communities, because they are communities. It's the power of the different people's brands that are out there that gives you access to a wider variety of people that perhaps you wouldn't be able to connect with previously. So working with those brands and those companies and working with those representatives just gives you access beyond what you've got at this moment in time. So if you think, just pick one of those brands, Patagonia, they would have a database of 1 million people on their database to be able to access in some way. And getting those views from those people would be pretty critical, I would think.
Thank you. Really helpful.
Mark, you have a question. If anyone wants to raise their hand, I'll note.
I was interested in the panel's view as to whether they think that more public access should be provided and more public rights of way, and whether that would actually improve sustainability, help improve sustainability.
Yes.
We might be biased.
I think we could probably do a better job as well at looking after the ones that we've already got too. There's so many kind of paths in my local area that are just overgrown and unusable. I also think that the system of rights of way that's developed and the network in this country is kind of based on a kind of past use rather than what we actually need it for now. You know, you think about the number of horse riders in the country and the shocking lack of bridle ways. You know, that there are different users now, different needs, different ways of using the countryside. But that is a challenge within the current system that we have.
But we also have other ways of looking at access as well. So you've got organisations like Slowways kind of looking at active travel. How do you get between communities? And it might not necessarily just be the rights of way network. You've got all the open access land from the Crow Act, and then more recently the Marine Access Act. So we've actually got some opportunities to really increase access. But we are, at the moment, as an industry, speaking very much to the people who already know how to read the OS maps and who are already going out and using our trails and our rights of way. And really we need to be thinking about, we are a national resource. We need to be reaching out to a proper kind of representative audience. And we need to be a proper national resource.
I think we've got time for one more question. I'm getting told lunch is... I'm not going to hold you back from lunch. The gentleman, halfway down. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. My name's Chris from TYF, based in Pembrokeshire. And maybe it's a good question to finish on. I just wanted to sort of compassionately challenge you a bit, because I think the title is sort of good sustainability. For me, like, that's not good enough. We need transformational change at speed and scale, and thinking for the long term. And what we try and do at TYF is trying to adopt something called cathedral thinking. So thinking for sort of 200 years in the future, and how we can act for that today. So my question was sort of, are you thinking for the long term? Like, do you have an action plan which is for 2100 or 2186, which will be our 200-year birthday? So are you thinking for the long term? And if you were to describe the world that you will live in 200 years' time, what 3 words would you use and why? And maybe we could hear from each of the panelists around what those words would be.
Easy to finish on
Yes, we have lots of plans. We're an arm's length body. We've got lots of plans that go way into the future. And yes, we are engaging with young people through various different networks in terms of what the pipeline is going to be and what we need to be thinking about in the future. The impact we can have is quite tiny, other than being that conduit to bring people together that can make that informed change. I think it's a huge challenge to get change quickly when there is little funding. I think that is really to have that transformational change when you're thinking infrastructure. It costs money. Who is going to pick up the bill for that? How are we going to get that funded? Lots of challenges in that space. Completely agree with you that transformational change is needed. I think that is coming loud and proud from our young people coming through the fields. So that's where we need to be focusing energies. The 3 words I would use: welcoming. I would use that, and I'd use that whether I was Visit Britain or not. Welcoming, safe, and open.
Like those 3. We're not quite going 200 at the moment. We're trying to plan for 50, and that's really because we're the kind of like we're the canary in the coal mine. We're the thin line going around the coast, and with increasing storms and increasing frequency of storms, and also increasing weather events, kind of erosion and climate change are really impacting on where the trail is. So our 50-year plan that's as far as we can go, because any trying to guessing at where it's going to be after that is anyone's business. Luckily we've got geology on our side. If I was in the southeast, I'd be more worried. In terms of 3 words, well, apart from hoverboards, which is my 4th word, I think resilience to climate change is really important. That's going to be a real big challenge. Engaging. We need to. It has to be a 2-way conversation. It can't be us teaching and preaching. It has to be. We have to listen to people and find out what they want. And sustainable.
200 years. I think in Wales we are lucky, aren't we, that we've got the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. So we're kind of in that mindset of what am I doing for the future generations? What am I doing for my son Jack, who's going to be, you know, he's going to be dead in 200 years, but you know, it's going to be for him and for other kids that live in Wales and other kids who visit Wales that we are doing all of this work. So it's thinking ahead like that, and the plans that we develop always keep that in mind. So, you know, we're planning ahead at least 20 years with our National Park Management Plan. I can't say that we're doing 200 because that would be a massive document. I think it's also about not being overwhelmed by what you need to achieve, and designing plans that are doable, but you're going to have to be brave to make those changes. All of us in the room, anybody who deals with managing the countryside knows that it's sometimes challenging to even get the smallest changes made. So understanding how you make change happen, how you influence that, is one of the fundamental things that you need to kind of get sorted in order to see that vision happen in the future. Just 2 words from me, I think. Brave. I think we need to be really brave about what we do in order to make change happen, and exceptional. You know, we need to strive to have exceptional infrastructure and exceptional experience, and if you're kind of trying to achieve that rather than just making it a little bit better, then shoot for that. You'll get somewhere close, I'm sure.
Go big or go home. Yeah.
Cool. Plas y Brenin in 200 years, another 200 years.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you were answering the question, I'm saying to myself, we're 222 years old. So did our ancestors sit around the table and ask themselves the same question? You know, what are we trying to build here, you know, for the next 200 years? This building's been here for 200 years. The mountains have been here for thousands and thousands of years. So there are some things that don't change, that are here. Yeah, and you know, we should be, you know, kind of recognising that as well, and cherishing that, you know, for the future. So as I look at it, you know, in another 200 years, is this building going to be here? Yeah, absolutely, it will be here. And what will it be doing? That's the beauty. We don't know just yet, but it's going to be doing something very, very exciting. But the mountains will still be there, and the lake will still be there, and the fantastic views that we have will still be there in 200 years' time. 3 words I would use: inspirational, motivational, and magical would be a great word to live in.
Well, thank you. That was a really good one to end on, a really good to sort of set our sights into the future. Because I think, you know, thinking back to that 200 years, no one had even considered the impact of burning fossil fuels at that time. We were still establishing our kind of use of, you know, into industrial revolution. So our kind of attitudes to global resources were very different then. And I think thinking about where we are now and where we would be in that time is a really useful place to be. I think if we're doing this kind of conversation and taking it further. So thank you to the speakers for this morning, and thank you all for participating so readily into that conversation. And please carry on. This is a network, so the conversations need to carry on into the bar, around dinner, and onto the site visit. So that's part of the joy of being all together.